You sure?
I'm ready.
Okay. Good luck.
My timer ready?
Ready.
My opponent?
Mm-hmm.
Alright, let's begin. The 30 men in the group were called by the authorities the most dangerous men in this prison, reported Jay Diaz, a criminal rehabilitation expert. They were on heroin for 10 to 25 years, Diaz said. Until 2 months ago, they were all still on heroin inside the prison. The warden wouldn't even come in here without 5 armed guards. Things are different now, Diaz noted. You can see the difference in their faces. These inmates, the roughest in a tough Mexican prison, are today drug-free and want to stay that way. And, equally important, they are learning how to live that drug-free lives outside prison upon release. Because rehabilitation was valued, these men will be able to successfully re-enter society. I stand resolved that retribution ought to be valued over retribution and a criminal justice system. Before I get into the meat of my case, I have a few points of analysis on this resolution. First, that the resolution does not state that it is merely involved with the criminal justice systems here in the United States, so we can't confine ourselves to just America. Second, that the resolution is asking us to only uphold either rehabilitation or retribution, and not throw away the other one, merely to choose which one is more valuable. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's move on to my case. My value for this round, or the whole goal of my case, is dignity. This is defined as the state or quality of being worthy of honor or respect. My criterion for this round, or how we achieve this value, is rehabilitation, defined as to restore to a condition of good health, the ability to work, or the like. This would include things such as psychiatric help for those who need it, education and job training, programs how to find work, and counseling. I have a few more definitions for this round. Retribution, punishment for doing wrong. Criminal justice, the system of law enforcement involving police, lawyers, courts, and corrections, used for all stages of criminal proceedings and punishments. Now let's move on to my contentions, or main points. Contention 1. Retribution hurts society. Retribution hurts society. Retribution hurts society because it wastes the potential of the criminal. Rehabilitation helps to improve the criminal while he is in prison and attempts to reform and assist them so that they can once again be a productive member of society. German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "Punishment makes men hard and cold. It concentrates. It sharpens the feeling of alienation. It strengthens the power of resistance." Retribution only works to an extent. It also makes the criminal feel alone, and it doesn't fix the problem of why he committed the crime in the first place. And often, when a criminal is released from prison, he lacks the knowledge or ability to reacclimate back into society. Rehabilitation treats the criminals as individuals with their own needs and turns them back into productive members of society. But retribution hurts society. Contention 2. Valuing rehabilitation upholds dignity. Valuing rehabilitation upholds dignity. When we choose to value rehabilitation, we're also choosing to value dignity, because rehabilitation upholds the dignity of the criminal. Retribution does not uphold the dignity of the criminal. Instead, it treats criminals as guilty and useless, just needing to be punished, instead of individual humans with their own needs. Rehabilitation, on the other hand, upholds the criminal's human rights and dignity by treating them as an individual and giving them personalized care. When Burl Cain took the position as the warden at Angola Prison, a maximum security prison in Louisiana, it was known as the bloodiest prison in America. But now, it's a model for other prisons looking to reduce violence among prisoners. What changed? Warden Cain credits the rehabilitation programs inside the prison. Angola's programs are set up on the assumption that inmates have talents and hopes that can be cultivated, so they can contribute to life within the prison and even to society outside. Here, by valuing rehabilitation, Angola Prison was able to change the men inside for the better. From this example, we can see that when we value rehabilitation, we are also upholding dignity. Contention 3. Valuing dignity is imperative. Valuing dignity is imperative. So why should we choose to value dignity? Why make a conscious choice to uphold dignity over anything else? The answer is in the individual. Dignity, by its definition, is the state or quality of being worthy of honor or respect. Choosing to value dignity is choosing to value the individual's worth. Retribution lumps all criminals into the same category, guilty, and doesn't put any emphasis on the individual. Often, criminals feel worthless in and out of prison, especially when they lack the ability to be productive members of society. But rehabilitation helps criminals, like the toughest inmates in the Mexican prison, by treating them with individualized help to be able to rejoin society. Thank you, and I now stand ready for cross-examination.
All right. Yes, okay. You ready? Alright, then let's get started. So jumping right in, would you agree that retribution is essentially proportional punishment for a wrong?
I wouldn't say that retribution is necessarily proportional punishment for a wrong. According to my definition, it's simply punishment for doing something wrong.
Okay, and are retributive methods limited to prison?
Can you explain that a little more?
So, would there be more to retribution than simply prison sentences?
Well, the resolution is asking us for retribution or rehabilitation inside the criminal justice systems. So that's mainly what I think we're focusing on here.
Okay, would you agree that there's more to the criminal justice systems than simply prisons?
I would agree.
Okay, so jumping right into your value. You said your value is dignity, which is someone is worthy of honor or respect, correct?
Yeah, the state or quality of being worthy of honor.
Okay, so when you look at someone you respect, think of someone you respect. What would be a reason that you would respect that person?
Well, the term respect here is the respect of a person's their own individual worth and their worth as a human. Not necessarily we're honoring them, we're simply, every person has individual worth and dignity, and really what my case is trying to achieve is trying to uphold the dignity of the criminal and upholding their individual worth so they can contribute to society.
Okay, so essentially your value of dignity is saying each person is individually worthy of honor and respect regardless of what they've done.
Yes.
Okay, so you're saying that rehabilitation upholds their dignity, so how exactly, like very specifically and concisely, do you get there?
Well, rehabilitation upholds the criminal's dignity because with the programs and the multiple steps, the psychiatric help, the counseling, and all that, it helps the criminal because it helps them reestablish a sense of worth, because often when criminals are in prison, they lose that, and it helps them re-enter society to be a benefit to society.
Okay, so you talked a lot about how rehabilitation helps the criminal, but on your first contention you said that retribution hurts society, but how exactly does rehabilitation help society?
Rehabilitation helps society because it's improving the criminal and giving them the skills they need so that when they re-enter society, because most criminals are eventually released, then they will be able to get a job and be a productive member of society.
Okay, so you're essentially saying that we should help the criminals because then they won't recidivate or commit crimes.
Not necessarily. I'm saying we should help the criminals because they will eventually re-enter society, and we want them to be able to be productive to society.
Okay, so when a crime is committed, who really needs more, I guess you would say, not necessarily help, but who is really the one that needs something to be restored in their life, the criminal or the victim?
Well, I don't know about being restored, but the criminal does indeed need to be punished, and he is sent to jail.
Okay, so when we have a crime committed, you would agree that the criminal would be at fault, and then the victim would be the one that had a loss in their life, correct?
Yes, and the criminal's fault is corrected by them going to jail.
Okay. All right. No further questions. Can I write up time in 30-second intervals?
Yes. 2 minutes, 30 seconds. Two minutes. One minute, 30 seconds.
Thank you for that comment. All right. Ready? Are you ready? All right, and let's get started. Justice is the first virtue of social institutions. Because I agree with John Rawls that justice must be supported and achieved by institutions such as the criminal justice system, I stand resolved that retribution ought to be valued above rehabilitation in criminal justice systems. Now, before we get started, I want to quickly redefine retribution. And I want to offer an alternative definition that gives a little bit more background on the philosophy of retribution. And according to the Encyclopedia Britannica, quote, retributive justice is a response to criminal behavior that focuses on the punishment of lawbreakers and the compensation of victims. Let me say that again. On the punishment of lawbreakers and the compensation of victims. In general, the severity of the punishment is proportionate to the seriousness of the crime. Now, this definition of retribution offers a more complete view of what retribution in the criminal justice system really is. Now, I do agree with my opponent's other definitions. So now, given that definition of retribution, we must understand two things about the resolution. First, that what should or ought to happen in the resolution must not be based simply on the results, but must also be based on the merits of the action itself. For example, if stealing brought about good results, would it be right? Absolutely not. In the same way, we must understand if rehabilitation or retribution as an action in and of itself is moral and just. The second thing we must understand is that retributive punishment extends beyond prison. For example, a parking ticket would be another form of punishment or retribution. Criminal justice systems should value retribution because it protects and promotes procedural justice. According to Professor Rebecca Hollahander, procedural justice is, quote, fairness of process or fair process and legitimacy, end quote. The professor goes on to say that a process is considered fair when it is considered historically, philosophically, and doctrinally, and that scholars have formulated comprehensive theories about procedural fairness that sort through and reconcile economic, social, political, and dignitary concerns, end quote. Procedural justice is achieved, promoted, and protected by retribution. So, how does retribution achieve, promote, protect procedural justice? Let's take a look at my first main point. Point 1. Rehabilitation is not just. Rehabilitation is not just. Now, the affirmative speaker has already outlined some of the benefits of rehabilitation, and those are legitimate benefits. But the important thing to remember is that while rehabilitation does have some good qualities, it does not ensure justice. Now, I say that for two reasons. First, rehabilitation focuses only on the offender. Its purpose is to diagnose root causes and then educate, train, and reform. But it's only applied to one of the parties involved in the crime. Rehabilitation offers no justice for the victim. Rehabilitation offers no justice for the victim. It offers no restoration to society, and it offers no restoration to the community at large for the impact that the crime may have caused. The second reason why rehabilitation is not just is that, well, when rehabilitation is valued highest, it detracts from the application of justice for the offender. The just and fair consequence for the offense is overshadowed by programs. This application ignores both the idea of desert injustice and consistency in punishment. That brings me to my second main point, that retribution is the very essence of justice and the criminal justice system. Retribution is the very essence of justice and the criminal justice system. Criminal justice systems exist to punish those who have done wrong, not to reform them, and certainly not to prevent others from committing crimes. They can analyze the consequences and prevent themselves from committing crimes. Retributive theories of punishment understand each man's intellect and his ability to change. C.S. Lewis, in his essay, The Humanitarian Theory of Punishment, states, "To be punished, however severely, because we have deserved it, because we ought to have known better, is to be treated as a human person made in God's image." Now, this brings me right to my points against my opponent's case. Now, throughout his case, my opponent seems to emphasize one thing, and that is, how can we help the criminal? However, I'd like to ask an important question. When a crime is committed, who is the one that's wronged? The criminal or the victim? When we have a criminal justice system, we cannot look at how can we help the criminal, but how can we make a wrong right? And that's how we decide what we do in our criminal justice system, is how do we make a wrong right, and how do we offer justice and restoration for the victim, not the criminal. This is the main reason why we should value retribution above rehabilitation, is because it offers justice for both the criminal and the victim. Now, jumping right into my opponent's value of dignity. Now, human dignity, we all have human dignity. Human dignity is a great value. However, human dignity is not what we should be striving for in today's debate round, because human dignity falls underneath the umbrella of procedural justice. Procedural justice takes into account people's individual human dignity. It takes into account the situations, and it takes into account each individual situation, which is why it is a higher value than dignity in today's debate round. So now, jumping right in to a few additional points against my opponent's case. The first point that my opponent had was that retribution hurts society. However, this is simply not the case. And also underneath that point, he goes on to talk about how retribution makes the criminals feel alone and it doesn't treat them as individuals. However, I've gone down and shown through my case that retribution really does treat the criminals as people with an ability to change, and I back this up with a quote from C.S. Lewis. So the first main point is that retribution does not hurt society, because retribution allows the criminals to change and then not go out and recidivate or recommit crimes and contribute to society. So then, going on to the second main point that he had was that valuing rehabilitation, upholding dignity. Well, this is simply not the case, because rehabilitation does not uphold the dignity of the victim, and I've already gone to show this in many different ways. And then under his third contention, he talked a little bit about how rehabilitation values the individuals and helps the criminals. Have shown that we can't simply value the criminal. We must value the victim, and we must value the one who has been wronged in this case, which is why we have to value retribution, leading to procedural justice in a just, fair criminal justice system. Thank you, and now I'm ready for cross-examination.
Ready?
Alright, let's begin. So, first off, excuse me, in your case, you talk a lot about procedural justice, that's your
Yes.
value. How do we define justice? How do we know when something is just or whether something is unjust?
Well, we actually have a set of specifics that get into how do we know if something's just or unjust, and it's like 7 qualifications of something's just or unjust. I can go through that in my rebuttal if you want.
But who decides whether something is just or unjust according to those definitions?
Well, it's not necessarily just one person. We have to base it on the law, we have to base it on the situations, and we have, obviously the one who's making the decision would be people in the courts. So it's kind of a multifaceted decision.
Alright, thank you. Do you agree that most criminals will be released?
At some point, yes.
And would you agree that criminals who have received rehabilitation or a benefit to society opposed to criminals who have received no rehabilitation.
Well, I don't necessarily agree with that, obviously, because when we have retribution, it does allow the individuals to change, and it does value their dignity and their ability to change, because then they'll go out into society and they will have changed. For example, we have the example of Chuck Colson is a great example of that, so I don't necessarily agree with that.
Thank you. So, is retribution the only way to uphold procedural justice?
Retribution is a way to uphold procedural justice in the criminal justice system.
But not the only way. Is sending a criminal to jail, is that retribution?
That is one form of retribution. There's also things such as fine, restitution, and
Yes, but
parole.
that is a part of retribution.
Yeah.
According to where's the compensation to victim in simply sending a criminal to jail? And in your counter definition in retribution, you talked about how it has compensation to the victim. Where's the compensation in simply sending a criminal to jail?
Well, the compensation for the victim in that case may not be as clear as something where they are more valuing restitution, but the compensation for the victim is still there because they know that the criminal is receiving the just desert for what they did wrong. Every single person desires the justice for when you're wronged against, and retributive justice essentially steps in between the criminal and the victim and says, okay, the criminal is getting what he deserves, and that allows the victim to kind of have closure with the situation in that specific case. There's also other instances of restitution that offer even more direct compensation.
So what you're saying is that simply when a criminal is going to jail in the criminal justice system, that is restitution to the victim.
I wouldn't necessarily say restitution, but I guess you could say in a sense, but not necessarily specific definition.
All right. You talked about, in your last cross-examination in your speech, how retribution extends beyond prison. Does rehabilitation extend beyond prison as well?
I would say yes, since you kind of outlined that in your case.
All right, thank you. No further questions. May I have my prep time in 30-second intervals, please?
Two minutes, 30 seconds. Two minutes. One minute, 30 seconds.
Thank you. No further prep time. All right. My time ready?
Mm-hmm.
My opponent? All right, let's begin. In my first affirmative rebuttal of this debate round, I would like to talk about what the role of the government is. The role of the government is first to protect its citizens, and second, to improve and benefit society. So really just going down the flow of what my opponent talked about, my opponent started off by saying that that basically we need to look at the means, not necessarily the ends, just to summarize, to paraphrase what my opponent said, and how retribution extends beyond prison, and she gave several examples, and I agree, retribution does extend beyond prison, But so does rehabilitation, as my opponent agreed. Rehabilitation affects society as a whole and benefits it. My opponent started off by saying that rehabilitation is not just, and she gave 2 subpoints under that to really illustrate why. And my opponent said that it does not offer any restitution to the victim or society, and as my opponent brought up a counter definition for retribution, and I agree with that. I think that definition is fine. That the restitution to the victim is a big part of that, and my opponent said that rehabilitation does not really offer any restitution to the victim or society. As we covered in cross-examination, when the criminal is going to jail, then that alone is restitution to the victim. But also, rehabilitation gives restitution to society by improving the criminal, and when the criminal is released, as my opponent agreed, most criminals in the criminal justice system will be released, then they're released back into society. And if they're rehabilitated, then those criminals can benefit society and be productive members. But if they're not, then society gets no restitution. And so, what I'm saying is that rehabilitation really is a benefit to society and offers restitution to society, but retribution does not offer restitution to society and really doesn't fulfill that definition there. My opponent's second subpoint is that when rehabilitation is valued over retribution, that detracts from justice and that the programs overshadow the punishment. But with rehabilitation, there's still the same punishment. We're not reducing the sentences, we're simply adding on all the care for the criminals so that they can be a benefit to society when they are released. So it does not detract from justice. There is still the punishment that the criminal justly deserves, but then the criminal also is able to benefit society when he is released. My opponent's second contention was talking about how retribution is the essence of justice, and as I talked about under the earlier subpoint, how retribution offers no restitution to society. And really my first contention of my case, how retribution hurts society. Retribution hurts society because it's wasting the potential of the criminal. Rehabilitation helps society because it's improving the criminal and helping them be a benefit to society when they're released, but retribution does nothing, it just throws them in jail, and that doesn't help society. Moving down, my opponent had brought up some issues with my case, and my opponent said that rehabilitation is criminal-based, but rehabilitation is society-based. We're improving the criminal so that they can improve society in turn when they are released. So rehabilitation is not merely criminal-based, it's society-based. My opponent went on to say how saying that retribution does not hurt society as it allows for change, but whereas retribution may allow for change, retribution encourages the change and directly benefits society through the use of programs. And I'll talk about how my opponent said that dignity is under procedural justice in my next speech. Thank you.
How much work time do I have left?
1 minute, 20 seconds.
Thank you. 30-second intervals, and then after 10, mom at the last 10 seconds. 10, just say 10. Okay.
One minute. Thirty seconds. 10 seconds.
All right. Is everyone ready? All right, then let's get started. Today, you're faced with a choice between rehabilitation and retribution. Now, throughout this negative rebuttal, I want to make this choice very clear to you today. And I'm going to first start off by saying that we must have a clear view of what each side is saying. So I'm going to quickly sum up my opponent's case in about one sentence. We must help the criminals, which will give us some benefit to society, essentially his case. Now my case is essentially saying we must have a holistic view of the criminal justice system by using retribution that leads us to justice in a more holistic view of criminal, victim, and society. So my first point against my opponent's case is that we must have a holistic view of victim, criminal, and society. Now throughout his case, my opponent said that it does offer some societal benefits. However, this is still missing one part of the three-part equation of victim, criminal, and society. It's missing the part of the victim. And when we only have these two pieces, we don't have victim, criminal, society. We have focusing on criminal and society, which is not a holistic view of the criminal justice system and is not a good way to look at criminal justice, what we should value in a criminal justice system. So, underneath that, having a holistic view, I do agree that both retribution and rehabilitation do extend beyond prison, and I'll go a little bit more into this as I go down my speech today. So now, first of all, we must have a holistic view, and retribution offers us a more holistic view. Secondly, we must value justice, and talking a little bit more about the values here is we simply cannot value dignity highest in today's debate round, because dignity in and of itself is great, but dignity does not give us that overall picture of what we should be looking at in the criminal justice systems, as it falls under procedural justice. Now this is something that my opponent did not respond to in his last speech. So now, first of all, we must have a holistic view and talking about the values. So my third point today is the idea of restitution and really giving the victim compensation. Now, in his last speech, my opponent repeatedly said that rehabilitation offers restitution because someone goes to jail, and he also said that rehabilitation offers restitution to society because criminals become productive. However, this still does not offer restitution to the victim, and it's almost not restitution in and of itself because criminals can change under retribution. Retribution is not something where you just put people in prison and they come out exactly the same. One great example of this is Chuck Colson, and when I talk about what happens after prison, I'm going to get a little bit more into that. So rehabilitation does not offer restitution. It does not offer compensation for the victims. It offers a way for the criminal to improve. Maybe. This is another point out of this. He said that it offers a way for criminals to improve. However, I'd like to point out one important thing here, is that criminals do not always actually improve under rehabilitation. And Sergeant Barbara Perry, under her study, said, quote, knowing that they would get out only when they exhibited good behavior and rehabilitation, some inmates engaged in con games to make it look like they had seen the light. So under this quote, we really see how rehabilitation does not always produce good results and can often not really be a good weighing mechanism of whether or not of our criminal justice system. So now talking a little bit more how retribution offers restitution for the victim. So say that your house got robbed. Now, a way that retribution would offer restitution for you and a way for you to receive compensation is that the criminal would have to pay back everything that he robbed plus more, which would cause him to lose something and you to be repaid. This is a form of retribution that is a very specific compensation for the victim that is under the criminal justice system and extends beyond simply prison, which I already outlined how prison does offer compensation. So now, we've seen how we must have a holistic view, and Retribution offers us that we must look at the values, and procedural justice is that value. And then I looked at how rehabilitation does not offer compensation for the victim, but Retribution does. Now I'm going to look now at what happens after prison. And I talked a little bit about this before, about how rehabilitation does not always work. So I gave the example for why Retribution does work, of Chuck Colson. Now Chuck Colson went through the United States retributive system, and after he was released, when he was in prison, he changed his life, and he gave his life over to Christ. Now he had a change in prison as a result of being in prison, and when he got out, he started a prison ministry, and he essentially went out and helped improve the world. This is a very concrete example of how retribution leads to criminals contributing to society after they release from prison. Whereas I showed from the quote from Barbara Perry that criminals are often try to trick out rehabilitative programs and are not always rehabilitated. So we have to have a holistic view. We have to value procedural justice. Retribution gets us restitution and compensation for the victim, and after prison, retribution allows criminals to benefit society. So finally, let's look at why should we value retribution really? We should value retribution because retribution is just. Retribution offers compensation for the victim, and it offers a just penalty for the criminal, and it leads to procedural fairness, procedural justice, which is really what we should be looking for in today's resolution and criminal justice systems. We need to strive for justice. We must have a holistic view of the victim, criminal, and society. Rehabilitation does not get us this. Retribution gets us the full view of victim, criminal, and society, and procedural justice. Thank you.
Can you please warn me at the 30 seconds and then 10, please?
You have 122. 30 seconds. Ten seconds.
Is everyone ready? Alright, let's get started. In this last speech of the round, I'm going to cover three main voting issues, or really crystallizing the round and the three main points for you. So first, we're going to talk about the holistic view that my opponent brought up in her last speech. Second, we're going to talk about the idea of restitution or compensation. And finally, we're going to look at the idea of the role of the government. So first, let's take a look at that holistic view. My opponent in her last speech stated that we need the three parts, the victim, the criminal, and society. We need to focus on all three of those in order to basically have, we need to focus on all three of them to basically have a good weighing mechanism. And my opponent said that rehabilitation is missing the victim. It doesn't focus at all on the victim. And I disagree. Rehabilitation helps the victim because the victim is part of society as a whole, and rehabilitation helps society and everyone inside society, including the victim. We can't just get pigeonholed into focusing on one or a small group of people, whoever the victim may or victims may be. Instead, we need to focus on improving society, including those victims, not merely the small group of people, but everyone in society. And really, when I'm talking about the holistic view, one thing that Retribution misses is society. Retribution does not offer a benefit to society. Rehabilitation benefits society because it improves the criminals and therefore improves society. When the criminals are let out and released into society, then they are a productive member of society when they have been rehabilitated. But Retribution offers nothing to those criminals or society as a whole in terms of a benefit. Moving on, my opponent, when talking about restitution and compensation, again was talking about how rehabilitation does not offer restitution or compensation to the victim, but it does offer restitution and compensation to society, and the victim is part of society. Society is all of the people as a whole. My opponent brought up the example of Chuck Colson, who changed in prison, talking about how retribution can change people, that you don't need rehabilitation. But in this example, my opponent didn't state whether it was pure retribution or whether there was rehabilitation involved. So we don't know. Maybe this person, Chuck Colson, was rehabilitated while he was in prison, and then that's why he was changed. So we don't really know one way or the other. We just know that there was a person in jail, rehabilitated or not, who changed. And really, my opponent said that rehabilitation isn't always good, it doesn't always give a good result, but even if some people take it, which much more do, it's still a net benefit and it still improves society. So here we've seen that rehabilitation benefits the criminal and the victim and society. Thank you.